Well, now episode 6 of our ranking of all Beatles songs ever. Number 133 is the second time we have a A-side, a single, a hit. It's my second least favorite Beatles single. It's The Ballad of John and Yoko. What can I say? It's a funny song. It's a great song. It's some people think it's like a boring travel vlog of John Lennon talking about his honeymoon with Yoko Ono, but I think that makes it special. That makes it stick out. In the song's lyrics, he describes those first days of their marriage when they had those peace happenings in Amsterdam and in Vienna, which is my hometown. We're recording in Vienna. And it's funny, they talk about eating chocolate cake in a bag when there was about Vienna, which is a reference to the so-called Sachertorte, which is something that tourists, I'm from Vienna and I never really been to the place where the Sachertorte is made. It's a tourist thing. But they did that in a bag because it was their bagism happening when they were hidden in a bag. And musically it's also interesting since it's one of those few songs, and it's especially at that time in the career, May 1969, where only John and Paul are on that record, because Ringo was, I think, filming. Was doing a movie at the time, and George also was, I think, in Sardinia on holiday, so Paul McCartney plays bass and drums and John Lennon plays piano and guitars on that song, The Ballad of John and Yoko. 132 is the single before, so I'm not a fan of the early 1969 singles of the Beatles. It's Get Back. It's that single. As you can see, the B-side, I prefer the B-side, which we haven't had yet. But Get Back is the A-side. It's, of course, it's a classic. The lyrics, I think that the initial lyrics are what's the most interesting thing about that song. In the beginning, Paul McCartney planned that song as a very political song, as it turned out to be a kind of nonsensical comical song, but the initial lyrics were very hot lyrics. I think there was something like meanwhile back at home, too many Pakistanis living in a council flat. Candidate Macmillan, can you tell us what your plan is? Can't you tell us where it's at? I think those were the initial lyrics, which were a critique of at that time there was a right-wing movement in England against immigration. One could even say maybe racist. There was a politician, I think his name was Enoch Powell, am I right? And he made some speeches against Pakistani immigration. And those initial lyrics by Paul McCartney were, of course, a satire and ironic about that subject. But the Beatles at that time thought maybe that's too controversial, and maybe people will misunderstand the lyrics and think that we are racist when we're singing that. In today's climate, it would be virtually impossible to do such lyrics. They would be misunderstood immediately, of course. But I think that would have been a very bold statement to make, like a very political song, a Paul McCartney song that political. But as it turned out, it's still a nice rock and roll number, but the lyrics, of course, are nonsense lyrics. And what I also want to say, great lead guitar by John Lennon. It's one of the few occasions when John Lennon really plays magnificent lead guitar and a great solo. Very bluesy, you know. You don't get that kind of bluesy lead guitar from George Harrison, I think. Number 131 is This Boy, a B-side of I Want to Hold Your Hand, which was of course the big breakthrough single in America, the first number one of the Beatles in America. This Boy is a great B-side from the early B-sides, the best of the 1963 B-sides, of course. Classic ballads, beautiful three-part vocal harmonies. Great song, and the live versions, many of the live versions are also very funny because they never knew when they had to sing This Boy and when they had to sing That Boy, so they often were laughing and almost couldn't go on singing the song because they never knew when to sing which line. The next one is 130 is I'm So Tired from the White Album, again written in India, like 90% of all White Album songs. It's about John Lennon trying to meditate and not yet getting into that state, that transcendental state, and so he was very tired, as the song suggests. Next one is 129. The A-side of the B-side we've just had, I Want to Hold Your Hand. Of course, big hit, one of the most successful singles ever by anyone, and it kicked off Beatlemania in America. So it's a very important song, of course, but I was never that big of a fan of that song. You know, I think some other of those early Beatles classics I do prefer, but that's just my personal opinion. Written in Wimpole Street, where Paul got together with Jane Asher in early 1963 and then moved in to Wimpole Street with her parents. You know, Jane Asher, Peter Asher, and the parents of Jane and Peter all lived in Wimpole Street, and Paul lived there until he bought a house in Cavendish Avenue. And this is one of the few songs where John and Paul together wrote a song there in the little room. He lived in a very little room, and they wrote the song there. Next one is 128, If I Needed Someone from Rubber Soul. Up until that time, possibly the best George Harrison song. Well, not according to my list. I have two early songs way up, but most Beatle hardcore fans think that this is George's best song up until that time. I also think it's a very good song. 127, Dr. Robert from, I think this is probably the first one from Revolver. So that shows you how great that album is, at least in my opinion. Great song, Dr. Robert. It's the same subject as the Rolling Stones had about the same time with Mother's Little Helpers. It's about a doctor who prescribes basically drugs to people who want to get high. Next one is 126, Love Me Do, the first single of the Beatles. Great bluesy song. I really like that song. It's not regarded that high by many people, including the Beatles themselves, but I think it was bold that they chose that song for the first single. You know, George Martin wanted them to do How Do You Do It, which was this slick, soppy, not very artistic number, but the Beatles really wanted to do something, you know, bluesy, and you know, they were like today we would say like an indie band. They wanted to make something not because it's commercial, but because they believed in it. And I think Love Me Do is much better than, you know, in the context of the time. I think it's better than it's given credit for. Number 125, You Like Me Too Much. Again, George Harrison, again 1965. This is from the Help, not from the Help soundtrack, but from the Help album. It's the song doesn't have really something special about it, but it's a very nice song. This is one of those songs that aren't really. Many people probably would have this song much lower because it doesn't stick out in any way, but it's really a nice melody in my opinion, and I think heartfelt lyrics about Patty. The next song is 124. It's Getting Better, from the Sgt. Pepper album. We're all tired, I think, about of Paul McCartney telling the story how they wrote the song. It's one of this, almost like Yesterday and Let It Be, one of those three things he's basically saying in every interview, so I'm not going to repeat the story, but yeah, it's written by him and John, and it's a great, typical, optimistic McCartney song from Sgt. Pepper. It's a good song. And the last one for episode 6, I think this is the 6th episode, is one of Paul's favorite Beatles songs, You Know My Name, Look Up the Number, which is the B-side of the Beatles' last single, Let It Be. But of course it wasn't recorded during the time of Let It Be, or maybe bits of it were, but this was a song the Beatles worked on from 1966 to 1969, whenever they felt like they had a funny idea for the song, they recorded a take of it, and the version of Let It Be is like a mix of all those funny ideas. It's more like a collage, and it's not really a song, like a pop song, but it's a very funny number, and I can see why Paul McCartney likes that song so much, because probably it reminds him of those fun times when they recorded it. And it has Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones on saxophone. So that was episode 6.